Hello, welcome to the Unit 5 section, and what we're going to do on this video is talk about drugs. Okay, so let's go through and do a little bit on what you need to know about drugs. So psychoactive drugs, what we mean by psychoactive drugs are chemical substances that alter perceptions and mood. So there's lots of different categories of psychoactive drugs and lots of different specific psychoactive drugs that you do need to know. One concept that you should know about is tolerance. Okay, so the idea is that as you continue to use, or as someone continues to use, because you would never use, right? As someone continues to use a psychoactive drug, they produce more of a tolerance to that drug. It takes more and more and more of that drug to give them the effect. Okay, so with repeated exposure to a drug, it lessens the drug effect, and therefore it takes them more, or it takes them greater quantities to get that high or to get that effect. So you can see here, first exposure, and then after that, it takes more and more and more to get the same effect. Unfortunately, this is what sometimes leads to addiction. There are physical and psychological symptoms of withdrawal that happen when someone has been addicted to a drug and tries to get off of a drug. And this is what some of the scariest realities are about drug use, is that the physical dependence on drugs can be so life-altering that is very difficult for someone to stop using the drug, and it just perpetuates a cycle of drug addiction and dependence on them as well. So the definition here we have of withdrawal: when you stop using a drug after addiction, you may experience discomfort and physical pain and intense cravings. People who go through withdrawal with some drugs experience way more than what I would consider discomfort. They experience sweating and temperature changes and nausea and vomiting and dizziness and blood pressure changes, and they can even enter into a coma. They can become severely dehydrated. They can even die from withdrawal. So it's way more than discomfort for some drugs. So this is a very serious problem that a lot of people who start using drugs experience when they try to get off of them, and then they just end up continuing to use them. Addiction is a craving for a chemical substance despite its adverse consequences. So addiction can be both physical, such as like nicotine addiction, but also psychological, like marijuana is not necessarily physically addicting, but it is psychologically addicting. So we see both types of addiction. Okay, someone who is addicted will experience very high highs and very low lows. Also, one thing we see is that addiction is tied to brain activity. So remember, the amygdala controls fear and rage. You'll see, here is an addict and a cocaine addict, and if they're watching a video on nature, the amygdala is not lit up. But as soon as they start watching the video on cocaine, the amygdala lights up. So it shows you there is even the psychological addiction is an emotional addiction. It really is a very strong brain addiction. It's not just something that people make up. All right, drugs. We need to know the different categories of drugs, all right? So first of all, drugs are agonists and antagonists. Remember those guys? I told you they'd be coming back, all right? So agonists are going to mimic the neurotransmitter. Antagonists are going to block the neurotransmitter. Okay, so with drugs, we say they're excitatory or inhibitory. Okay, excitatory would be an agonist, and inhibitory like blocking would be an antagonist. All right, and so here's our dendrite, soma, axon terminal branches, squirt. Okay, here's our neuron. All right, and here you see neurotransmitters here. Okay, and crossing the here's the sending, and crossing the synaptic cleft or synaptic gap, and it's binding to the receptor sites of the next dendrite. All right, the different categories of drugs. Okay, we have stimulants and we have depressants. Stimulants stimulate, all right? So they excite, they're excitatory, and they are going to speed up body functions. Okay, so examples of stimulants, and you do need to know, not only be able to list examples, but also each drug, is it a stimulant or a depressant, okay? Caffeine is a stimulant, nicotine, cocaine, ecstasy, amphetamines, and methamphetamines, all stimulants. Okay, so things that it's going to do, a stimulant for your sympathetic, remember this is your fight or flight, rah, okay? So it's going to dilate your pupils and speed up your heart rate. Caffeine and nicotine are both stimulants, okay? Caffeine and nicotine both increase heart and breathing rates and other autonomic functions. Cocaine is a stimulant, okay? Last year I would go around telling people, remember, cocaine is a stimulant. Cocaine is a stimulant, because this one always shows up for some reason on AP, okay? So what it does is it actually blocks the reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, which creates this increased flux of dopamine that causes this feeling of euphoria. So this is why people who take cocaine, they get that high, but then what happens is immediately afterwards, they crash. Okay, so cocaine is definitely a stimulant. Okay, here's the glucose metabolism. Okay, so this is most likely looking at a PET scan of cocaine. And you can see it. Oh, my thing isn't going to work, is it? No. Wow. It used to move, but it doesn't work. Sorry. All right, ecstasy is a stimulant, or methylene dioxymethamphetamine, MDMA. Okay, it's also a mild hallucinogen, so it produces this euphoric high, which actually can damage your serotonin producing neurons in the long run. So what happens is when you're not high on ecstasy, you have a permanently depressed and deflated mood and impaired memory. Ecstasy really messes you up in the long run. So this is something that is really horrible for your body. You can see serotonin present in the cerebral cortex neurons, okay? This is the control group, meaning they're not on ecstasy. 2 weeks after ecstasy, this is what it looks like, okay? And then they don't do ecstasy again for 7 years. This is only as much as it's built back up. Okay, so like, look how much was lost in 2 weeks. And then 7 years later, it's still not even back where it was. Like, that's insane. That's really crazy. So it's a cycle, you know? They don't feel good, so they do ecstasy. It makes them feel good for a second, and then they feel even worse. So then they turn to it again. And it's just this vicious cycle, which is why you should never start doing any of these drugs, because it just makes things worse. Amphetamines are a stimulant. Okay, they have some physical effects here. Irregular heartbeat, blood pressure, rapid breathing, body temperature, twitching, hyperactivity, insomnia, dilated pupils, sweating, restlessness, dry mouth. And then the psychological effects are anxiety, paranoia, irritability, aggressiveness, compulsive skin picking, delusions, and repetitive behaviors. Bath salts, okay? I don't have time in this video to show you this bath salts video, but if you are interested in understanding what bath salts do to you, it's really horrible. You can go on Blackboard and open up this PowerPoint and click the link to watch the bath salts video. Okay, the next category we have is depressants. So depressants depress, they slow, they reduce, okay? So reduce neural function and slowing body functions. Examples, alcohol is a depressant. Barbiturates, which are essentially tranquilizers, are depressants, and opiates are depressants. So it's going to, again, affect your parasympathetic nervous system versus stimulants, which affected your sympathetic, fight or flight, rah. The parasympathetic parachute you back down to homeostasis. The depressants have a calming effect on the nervous system. Unfortunately, what happens sometimes with drugs is people do too much. We have some overdoses of drugs and they completely depress their nervous system to the point where it stops functioning. So that's no good. Okay, constricts your pupils and slows your heart rate. So if too many depressants will stop your heart. Alcohol. All right, alcohol impairs motor skills, impairs judgment. It's going to impact that frontal lobe. It's going to impact that hippocampus. Okay, you would remember if you saw a hippo on campus. Interferes with your ability to form new memories. It also increases aggressiveness and decreases self-awareness. So this is why people feel like they're more confident and they have less social inhibitions with alcohol. However, evidence does show that chronic alcohol use, people who are alcoholics, can lead to brain shrinkage of volume. So it can lead to damage to the frontal lobes, impaired performance on frontal lobe functioning, judgment. It's pretty bad. So this definitely has some long-lasting effects as well. Barbiturates, I know this is kind of cut off. They're essentially tranquilizers, okay? They depress activity in the CNS, and they also reduce anxiety, and impair memory and judgment. So here are some examples of barbiturates in case you were wondering like what the actual names were. Opiates. Opiates are depressants and they are so addictive. They're one of the most highly addictive category of drugs. Although they lessen pain and anxiety, in the long run, they're really damaging. And sometimes we see that people who start taking them for pain end up like physically and psychologically addicted to opiates. Examples are morphine and heroin. And also this crocodile. This was something that was crazy a couple years ago in Russia. They would take it and then people were dying. Again, we can't watch these videos now, but if you want to go on the PowerPoint and watch them on your own time, you can feel free to watch that. All right, hallucinogens are drugs that distort perceptions and make you see or hear things that aren't there. Okay, so they evoke sensory images in the absence of sensory input. Okay, examples, LSD, speed, and marijuana. Again, we can't watch this video, but you can watch it later. All right, so areas of the brain affected by THC shows you the widespread effect of THC in the brain. It's going to impact movement, sensations, vision, memory, reward centers, and judgment. Here is a nice little chart that gives you all these drugs in the category that they're in. So if I were you, what I would do is I would pause this video and make sure in your RT&W that you have all this stuff. And if you don't, go in and get it. Take this down as notes because you do need to know all of these drugs, what category they are, and what they do. Okay, so like alcohol, heroin, caffeine, meth, cocaine, nicotine, ecstasy, MDMA, and marijuana. You need to know what is it, a depressant, a stimulant, or a hallucinogen, and then what does it do. So make sure you have this down. I'm going to stop this video here and we will pick up with it in the next one.